All right, we're back with Calling All Men. This is Michael Sky, and the crisis that our boys and men are facing. The aspect of that crisis, we're going to look at the education system, and we're going to look at the challenges that our boys are facing in the education system, and particularly with a spotlight on African American boys. Um, our next guest, I should say that. Um, yeah, across the board, boys are dropping behind girls in the dropout rates of school, in university attendance, in graduating from university, and I think in finding jobs. I think even in pay after university. Boys are struggling a lot, and I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons behind that. Our next guest is the father of three children who were educated in traditional, hybrid, micro, and self-directed learning models. I'm curious to hear, yeah, about that. His first son was the first Black male valedictorian of his public high school. His second child was a straight A student who walked out of high school, started college at 15, published her first book at 17, completed a marketing apprenticeship at 18, and since 18 has been working full time at a marketing firm. And his third child, since 15, has been a professional actress, winning several awards. She has had her own communications consultancy, is an officer in charge in the Civic Air Patrol, and is earning her pilot's license. So, all three kids are self-governing beasts, he says, who don't ask him for money. That sounds like every parent's dream. Um, so our next guest has concluded that if you're raising a Black boy in America, then you should treat the traditional school like a rabid dog. Don't make eye contact. Don't feed it. Just back away slowly. He says that a future ready education is not possible for boys in any school that looks, feels, tastes, or smells like the schools of old, many of which resembled prisons. This is especially true for Black boys. Matt Barnes is our guest, and he provides free coaching to any parent who wants to raise self governing boys. His coaching teaches parents how to throw out the old school playbook and how to replace it with learning that is much harder, more engaging, and 100% future ready. He's been, when he heard about Calling All Men, he was passionately, um, yeah, asking to be a part of it. And I love this because yeah, our boys are really struggling and need all the help that we can get. And I know in the a particular crisis that we're facing is fatherlessness, or as Dr. Warren Farrell describes it, um, dad deprived boys, the rise of epidemic of dad deprived boys, and that's especially pronounced in the African American community. Um, Over the last 25 years, Matt has run an $18 million hospital department, distributed half a billion in philanthropy, led an education reform nonprofit, and served on 10 educational boards, including a public and private college. And yeah, has coached thousands of parents on how to grow self-directed learners. Matt, welcome to Calling All Men.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be on.
Yeah, so that's quite a resume there. Especially, with the results that your kids are getting. I'd love to hear you tell us from your point of view, because we're really trying to get a sense of like what's the full scope of the crises our boys and men are facing. From your perspective, how does what does it look like? What are we really struggling with? And what are yeah, what's at stake if we don't get this turned around?
Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for having me on, Michael. Really, really honored to be here. To answer your question, what's happening with boys is boys are growing up with no meaning in their life, and they're growing up to become just incredible followers, not leaders. And so when I talk about some of the work I do and some of the dynamics within the young men community, again, it's even more, it's more specific, more acute in African American boy community, but they are just following the crowd. They are not pursuing um, missions that are on their heart, and they're certainly not producing anything that is of great value for society. And so that's what I'm trying to help parents understand, that your young men are far more capable than what we give them credit for and what schools tend to ask of them. And without inspiring a bit more view of a meaningful life, our boys are going to continue to struggle and continue to chase after short term entertainment.
I gotta tell you, I dreaded public school. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. Yeah. Um, and I'm very jealous when I hear of um, kids that had other opportunities. What you say, so parents call you all the time, and you said it's often too late. What do you mean too late? Like, what's some of the trouble that the kids get into where it's too late?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll use your example, Michael, but I could use a number of any young men that I've worked with or families who have young men in the home. But if you grow up hating school, what you're likely to do is to think you're stupid, because the school every day says you're not meeting whatever these arbitrary expectations are. After a while of hearing that and looking around and wondering, why am I not keeping up? You start to look at yourself and think that you're the problem. The problem actually is the system. And the system is one of entire conformity. It's a powerful drug of conformity that is trying to be pushed down the throat of every young man. So when young men like yourself, or again, like Trey or Jonathan or any number of people that I've worked with recently, once they start to internalize the sense that they are incapable, that they're not good at learning, that other people are smarter than them, that there's no value that they can contribute. Now that child turns into a potentially a dangerous human, because a young man who has nothing to live for is a dangerous human being. And unfortunately, most young men that I have interacted with in certain districts, it is actually most young men come away from school with the same feelings that you had, Michael. Many of them never recover from it and are stuck for a lifetime. So this is really existential. It's also multi generational, because you ruin one man, man, you're looking at generations of future young men and women who are going to be ruined. That is what's at stake here.
Wow. Yeah, I barely graduated high school myself, not for a lack of intelligence, just I was just checked out. Just I just barely slid through, like I was escaping school every chance I got, playing hooky and forging notes from my mother. And um, a few
That's
years
called
after.
being creative, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. I think everything I really learned that's worthwhile in life, I learned it after school when I went out on my own. In fact, I went to university, and again, I hated it. I was like, "What is this?" And I noticed that like my uncles, my grandfathers, they were entrepreneurs, and of course, during the time when I was graduating, there were the stories of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Michael Dell, and it's like, wait a second, these guys did not finish university. They all dropped out and then just followed their passion, and were like self taught, and so yeah, that's the path I went down. But I heard about my brother. So I'll make this brief, but my parents divorced when I was 14. We'd had a very close family. My mom started, raging against men in every form. Her father, my dad, the church, everything. And so it was kind of a very toxic place for me to becoming a young man. And at 17, before high school, I escaped. A few years later, after kind of making my way, my youngest brother was still at home, Um, and I heard that he was really starting to hang with the wrong crowd. He was, doing drugs. And then I heard about this incident where he got suspended from school because him and another kid were shooting a 22 rifle at a bus. And I was like, and I could so he's getting in trouble. And his mom is like, no, his mom is like, so dad left, and mom is not being a mom. And I'm like, and this guy's getting in trouble. He's going to identify himself as a loser, a criminal, a bad kid, and once he has that identity, that's going to his entire future. So I said, John, and he would sell newspapers after school. I said, John, you know how to sell. You're going to be just fine. Come to Texas. I'll take you under my wing. And so he dropped out at 16 and came out to live with his older brother. And that's kind of where my passion started. So I look at all these young men today, don't have fathers, school system sucks. And in my interpretation, they need older brothers. Yes, fathers, but like older brothers. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so, I mean, that's a great story. And that's a positive ending on something that could have been really nasty. Right. And unfortunately, most young men don't have someone that they can look up to, and like you did, you were a father figure to them, or I would call it an uncle figure that 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 brought him out. This is actually one of the big strategies that I coach parents around. So it's often single moms, it's awful single moms with boys who love their boys to death, meaning I'm going to keep the expectations low on my boy. I'll cook for him. I'll clean for him. I'll do all the things because I want to love on him. That's not what boys need. That's not what they want. So a mom, one of the strategies I really talk to parents about is creating an ecosystem around your boy. And what does that ecosystem have to look like? It's got to include other young men, one of whom, usually one or maybe more, is about 5 or 10 years older than your boy, but is someone who's doing okay. The reason is, and you've seen this, Michael, I'm sure, but at about 12 years old, the boys stop listening to mom and oftentimes dad, but they will listen to the 20-year-old or the 25-year-old that lives down the street. And so the mom or the dad, whomever is raising these kids, strategically, your goal is to identify these people for your children and then connect them. And here's how you connect them. Just again, for the folks listening, this is actually ridiculously simple. And it's incredibly pays off incredibly well. You contact that young man who's 5 or 10 years older than your son. Ideally, it's someone who has shared values. So, someone in the church, maybe it's somebody who's running a business. Heck, I've seen it done with, there was a mechanic that a mom knew and went to regularly, but that they had a relationship. And so she said, hey, could you take my son to breakfast? I'll pay for it. Just take him once. And if you like it, if you kind of enjoy him, I'll pay for a second one. And you do that with enough people, there's going to be a connection point where that mechanic then said, hey, I really like talking to your boy. He really likes cars. Hey, mind if I show him the car, I'm working on down at the shop, right? That then creates an ecosystem of learning that the boy can start to go, I want to be like that guy. And again, it can be a brother, it could be an uncle, it could be again, a contractor. It's ridiculously simple, but it's rarely done and used, and it's the best money you're going to spend if you're a parent.
Wow. I love that. Yeah, I didn't want to be like my dad in a lot of ways. Um, in the summers, I would go out west and I would visit my grandparents, and they were cowboys and builders and entrepreneurs and kind of men's men, and felt like going out to the Wild West. And that gave me a sense of like I want to be something like them. And boys need that so much, don't they? They need like at least one man in their life. And you know, there's a lot of um, some of the big stars on YouTube and social media these days, Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, um, their huge popularity to me points at they don't have these men in their real life, you know?
That's right.
Like when you're looking,
Exactly
yeah.
right.
And
Yeah, and those go ahead,
well,
sorry.
just what a tragedy, you know? And what like Jordan Peterson breaks down when he talks about their longing. Yeah.
So those guys, the Andrew Tate in particular, they're preying on young men who are disaffected. They're preying on young men who have never heard um, strength communicated. And to me, entrepreneurship is one of those hidden gems of strength. Like so, the journey of an entrepreneur is always one of a lot of failure. Always. I've not met an entrepreneur who hasn't failed far more than they've succeeded, right? And so that's a journey of strength, of overcoming failure over and over again. Again, the Andrew Tates of the world prey on that sense that boys actually want to have a struggle. They want to fight for something, but they spin that fight towards misogyny or other things like that. So the point of a parent, whether it's a dad or a mom, I know this show where we're talking to dads, even the dad, your job is to create an ecosystem around your boy. So you call your buddies, you find your mechanic or your friend who's an entrepreneur, and you start to strategically connect them. Because if you don't, those young men will find the Andrew Tate or the next one, right? There's gonna be a next one here shortly. I actually personally I like a lot of Jordan Peterson stuff. He raises the expectations, I think, and that's another real problem we have. We do not have high expectations for our boys, and again, that's a place where the parent, particularly the dad, has got to be setting a standard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that a lot of like I've seen a lot as I've been doing some research to organize this summit. I've seen a lot of articles online, people worried about their son. Oh, like, oh no, he's watching Andrew Tate. Oh no, he's following this content online. And I suspect that a lot of these kids, the ones who do have dads or the ones that do have male, even male figures around, they don't respect those men on some level. Like, why are they not listening to the men in their life if they have them, the fathers in their life, the brothers? And one of my questions is like, yeah, where are we falling short as men to not have their respect? And I think sometimes it's also like they feel like we don't care, like we don't understand them.
Well, let's be clear. I mean, I sorry to cut you off here, but part of this is actually a cultural problem. We live in a culture that has for 40 years been di- um, diminishing the role of dads in literature, in entertainment. The Simpsons. So we now live in a culture where it is easy to blame dads. It's easy to attack dads and to frame them as out of touch and lost. But that's where, again, for me, when I work with dads, it's all about strategy, right? You are running. In fact, one of the things I talk about is dads, you got to think about yourselves as head coaches of your boy. And what that means is your job is not to teach your child everything that they need to learn. Your child is to surround them with assistant coaches who are experts on a variety of things and make sure that that expert is getting access to your son. So for that dad who senses, and I felt this, I mean, I'll just be honest, I felt my son going, hey, but you're out of touch. You don't know what you're doing. But I had a Thomas Glenn who was actually 30 years older than my son. I had a Sam Oke who was 8 years older than my son. And those guys were constantly reframing, feeding my son. My son started to respect them, and I'm good with that. If my son respects a good man, awesome. If it's not me, that's fine. But I want him to respect and to admire a good, solid, community loving, wife loving, man. And so, again, dads will oftentimes they'll get their feelings hurt, and I felt this, y'all. I'll just be honest with you. I felt it that why is he not honoring me as the man who brought him into this world and who might take him out? But but at some point it did make sense that, and I was given coaching from other men saying, "Hey, man, your influence is waning. You got to find other young men who can play that role." So
I love that. I love that. Yeah, like, um, really it can be simply that he's just drawn to some other um, life or way of being that another man has. And I think that when we used to live with a more extended family or live in smaller settings like a village or something, you'd have a lot of men around you. I mean, I when I came to Kenya the second time, I went out, or no, sorry, it was Uganda. There was a little boy because I'd helped a Ugandan kid become an entrepreneur as he was going through university back in 2006, 7, and so on. And I went to visit him in 2010, and his son was named after me, Mikey. But Mikey didn't know his father from his uncles and all the other men around. Like there wasn't just like this, and I think this, and I thought there was something beautiful about that in that in our kind of nuclear family model in the West now, a lot of people expect their father to be everything. And if their father didn't teach them about fixing cars, or if he wasn't masculine in the right way, or he wasn't financially successful, like there's something wrong with dad. And I mean, I love what you're talking about, like um the head coach model. I love that. I love that because it gives dad a real honoring role to assemble the right team of coaches for your son. It views your son as like a superstar athlete, and it allows you to not be too attached to your son not being looking up to you for everything.
absolutely. A couple things. This idea actually came from, I got a bunch of folks from Nigeria and Ghana in our church, and hearing the stories of them growing up in the rural environments where they would sit around a campfire and there were uncles and cousins, and the women would be sitting here multiple generations, and the boys would just be sitting quietly listening. As they got older, they would just kind of listen, and they would pair off and have conversations organically with other men. This was where I was like, that's what's broken here, right? We do not have that shared sense of uh, connection. And so when I'm talking about this idea of the head coach, it's your job now, dad, to rebuild it, right? And it's going to be hard because our culture is not connected like it once was, but you can now start to strategically rebuild it. Here's another piece of this. Another thing, Michael. So when you're rebuilding that assistant, if you're thinking about you're a head coach, when you're building your assistant coaching staff, you really have three goals or three jobs: to recruit them. That's what we were talking about so far. The second job is to train them. And the third job is to fire them. And so when I talk to, when I talk to dads about recruiting, that's pretty obvious. You're finding young men who are young or older men who are capable in some way that you believe that your son needs. But then the training part is there's a constant conversation between. It's almost, I call it triangulation, where the dad is talking to that assistant coach about what the dad is seeing at home in the life of that child. For example, boy, assistant coach, I'm seeing my son on his phone a ton, and I'm seeing him watching Andrew Tate. Hey, man, can you look into Andrew Tate and maybe talk to my son about it? Because there's something there. I want you to scratch on a little bit, right? That triangulation allows the assistant coach to have a better understanding of what that child may be dealing with, and then in their interactions they can go deeper. And hidden things don't stay hidden when you have connections like that. It's a little bit, I won't call it manipulative, I'll call it strategic, right? If you're trying to raise a young man who is prepared for a future that is just absolutely ridiculous in its complexity and how quickly things are changing, you've got to be strategic. You cannot leave this thing to chance.
Yeah, well, you think about all these other companies that are strategically trying to get our sons addicted to food, addicted to porn, addicted to video games, I mean, social media. Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Wow, yeah, it's so exciting because it gives a powerful calling to the father and a pathway forward, you know?
Michael, can
Um,
I add one other piece to this?
yeah.
What excited me about what you're setting up here is the possibility that other men can start doing what we're doing right here. And we can start bouncing ideas off of each other about what's working, what's not, what are strategies that might work in this circumstance, and what that is also where we're missing. So again, think of a head coach. A head coach needs a conference to go to learn about the art and science of head coaching, right? They need that. And so what you're talking about is actually exactly that. I'm hoping that there could be ongoing coaching and support after the event itself. So,
Yeah, well, it's one of the things I'd love to come from this is men coming together in different ways and supporting each other, and also men finding mentors, men finding brotherhoods, men finding community. And in the West, it's almost become taboo for men to gather together anymore. It's like there's the assumption that, oh, if men are getting together, they must be up to no good,
yep,
you know.
they're
And
gonna.
it's sexist if there's no women invited, you know. So we need to get the women in there.
Well, let
But
me, Michael, let me just
yeah,
talk
go
about
ahead.
that for a moment, because when I started to become more open and direct around my advocacy for boys and my advocacy for Black boys specifically, um, I started getting pushback. Well, what about the Black women? What about girls in general? What about like and what I had to do is I had to just stop, and because I kept trying to make the case, but there is a cultural opposition, um, that also says that boys, if they're broken, it's their fault, right? If they're on the street homeless, well, it's their fault. If they're not doing well in school, well, they don't. It's their problem, their fault. That is a model and a culture. Again, I think it's largely Western, that is catastrophic for boys, because the boys will internalize that and they will think that same thing themselves. Well, something must be broken with me. That's why I'm going to hang out on the street. So these are things that we've got to really be, again, strategic about confronting these messages, and strategic about continuing to move forward, because without it, our boys are going to continue to decline. There's no doubt that our boys are in free fall at this point. And if we do not think about them differently, it's going to continue.
You know, as I was researching to put this program together, what I realized is that there's a certain response, you know, when you say you're doing something with men or for boys or whatever. And one of those responses is, oh well, men have had the power forever, so they can just suffer a bit and take a back seat and they just have to deal with it, you know. And there's another group that says, well, that's for the government and our institutions. Let's focus on like let's look at that as a problem for government and institutions. And there's another camp that says, well, it's just about the individual man, and you know, he needs to man up, um, or it's an individual problem. But what about the role of brothers and fathers and community? I mean, you know, men are lacking in a sense of purpose. Men are lacking in connection. And to me, just from my background, because you know, in my Mormon upbringing, it was large family. It was father and son outings. It was Boy Scouts. The men had a path to priesthood. So and you serve a mission, and like it was patriarchy was a positive term. In fact, before school every year, my dad would sit each of us down, and my mother would sit down and take notes, and my dad would lay his hands on her head and give us a father's blessing before school, and he would warn us like to distinguish like truth from the BS that the leaders of the public school system are going to
Right.
teach, you know, which I think was an awesome thing, for me to have my radar up. But um, so to me, like when I look around and I see the troubles, like me, I see my younger brother struggling. Well, that's my calling. Like that's for me to do as a brother, you
Oof,
know?
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if not you, then really who is it? And institutions are terrible at recovering lost souls. Terrible. Here's
And they
oh,
don't care, they're not human. I mean,
no,
at the end of the day, it's not human.
no, no. Yeah, yeah. Here's a another quick thought. Um, when I have talked about boys and that boys need a specific and strategic response, I don't actually look to institutions to bring that response because I've been a part of too many institutions and I know just what a pipe dream that is. I talk about the individuals in the closest to that trial, so moms, dads, uncles, brothers, etc. But here are the people who never argue with me about the importance of reaching out and helping young men, and that is women who've been affected and hurt by men. And there's a long list of women out there who have been injured by broken men. And what I'm talking about is how do we make sure that men grow up recognizing that not only is their job to help their brother or sister or cousin who's struggling, but also to protect those around them. That is a meaningful charge. And most young men now don't have any connection with the idea that their job, their godly ordained job is to protect. That shaping causes a lot of moms to go, oh, okay. A lot of women to go, all right, maybe we do need to get some space for men to gather to talk about how to help these boys.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, the pushback on that is, astonishing to me, you know? I mean, eh, boys are boys are human too, you know?
Boys are
Yeah,
human too.
yeah.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, in my family personally, my mother was the very dominant figure. So, I had a lot of empathy towards my dad and I saw his struggles and yeah, so anyway, let's so you do this coaching like your profession is something else, but you just offer this coaching out of
So, two things. One, I had a pretty good career and we live really modestly. And my wife actually is doing well as well. And so I don't we don't have a drive for economics right now. We just we're in a place where there's a book I read years ago called Your Money or Your Life. And we wanted to get as quickly as we could to a position where we could decide exactly what it is that we were going to do with our life. And for me, this is it. And I don't, again, in a situation where I don't need compensation. And most of the families that actually need the help that I provide, they can't, they can maybe pay me a little, but money is a barrier for most of those families. And so I just say, call it free. And occasionally I'll get some, gift card or something like that. But yeah, I'm in a position where I can do it.
yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. Wow. Um, how did you if you wouldn't mind, take us back into your story as a boy, with the education system. What was your situation with family and parents, and how did you engage with the school system?
Yeah. So I'm the son, grandson, and great grandson of teachers. Um, a great uncle founded an HBCU, historically black college in Jackson, Tennessee. I mean, education is the family business. And so, really, what that meant was that school was the family business. And um, my oldest brother, I interact with him now. He is a straight genius at fixing things. I mean, unbelievable. He is a learner. He's rabid in his ability to learn. It's incredible. But during school, he was forced to sit in a chair all day long and he hated school. and just came got off track and et cetera. And so I watched that happen. And now looking back, I'm like, wow, what if he had had more opportunities to explore and to do the things that were of interest to him? My middle brother was really academically strong, but bored. And he went through school, dropped out of college, and then started his own business. I was not as academically strong, but I was good enough. And for me, I recognized the game early. And the game is you get grades good enough to keep people off your back. That's it. So for me, I was just if somebody was on my case, I would just get the grades a little bit higher and then cut and then call it put on autopilot. Um, but when I went to college, again, not knowing why, I went to college and after 2 years of drinking and partying it up, I was about to drop out and I had to decide for myself, what did I want for my life? And that was the moment when I took ownership of my own life and my own learning. And had I been, a lot of the work I do is to help parents recognize we got to coach young men to take up that responsibility ridiculously early. I argue by around age 13, where they are now making most of the decisions for how they operate their life. So that by the time they are 18, they've had a lot of practice making decisions, taking risks, failing, getting up from the failure, and not just following the educational pathway. And so for me, it took me years to realize that I actually love to learn, that I love to create. Another quick story, Michael. Looking back, there's so many different touch points where I'm like, gosh, that was a huge missed opportunity, like my brother. But I was an amazing artist in seventh, eighth, and ninth grade. Amazing. I was winning awards. I loved it. That's the only thing I remember about ninth grade was my art. But in order for me to go to college, my counselor told me that I needed to drop art in 10th grade so I could double up on math in order to go to college. And I dropped art and I never took an art class again. And now at age 45, well, I'm 51 now, but at age 45, I rediscover that artwork and I've got artwork around my house and I'm doing all sorts of creative things. And I'm like, that was a missed opportunity. Who knows where that would have led? But these are the types of touch points in a life where parents and adults are shaping children in a pathway that is narrow. The one thing about the future, Michael, and I know I'm way off topic here, but the one thing about the future that is entirely clear is the pathway is wide. There are opportunities all over the place. I'm talking to you and you're in Kenya. I'm in Houston, Texas, and we're having a conversation. The opportunities are global. Never restrict a child because of what you think the pathway to success looks like. That those days are over. So again, back to my journey. That was my kind of repeated experience where I was being confined into a box that didn't fit well, but I just did enough to make it through, and never enjoyed education from probably second grade on.
So, how did you go about coming up with non-traditional ways to raise your kids, to
Yeah,
educate your kids?
yeah. Well, it started with trauma. My son, um, his principal, the week before, I'll try to give you the shortened version of the story, but the week before school started, his principal was in the news because she had been telling her staff that she wanted her son, her grandson, who was starting school that same year, to be in a class with other good white neighborhood kids. This was in 2008, and when this hit the fan, that the principal was making these statements. Um, I was, of course, injured, but I also still wanted my child to go to that school, despite the insult. I still wanted my child to go to that school because I was committed that you have to get your child in the right school. But after thinking about it and praying about it over the weekend, I was like, I can't put my child in an environment where the principal has argued that my son is somehow second. And so we became homeschoolers in a weekend, Mike. In one weekend, we became homeschoolers and didn't know what the heck we were doing. And we then shortly
Good for
thereafter
you, Dad.
well, again, it wasn't something I had planned on doing, but it was just this point where I said I can't support that school, and there were no other options around. So we decided to try it. After a few months, we realized Our son is learning ridiculously fast. He's actually enjoying the learning. And so we tried it again the next year. And we kept doing that until he decided he wanted to go to public school in ninth grade and then just crushed it. So it was accidental for us. But going through that experience taught me how many ways there are to learn now in 20, that was 2008 to, 2000, whatever, 21, something like that. How many different ways there are to learn that weren't even conceivable when I was a child. There's never been a more exciting time to educate a child if parents realized how many opportunities there are out there. And if the parent backs away from that rabid dog that we call school long enough to realize that our children can learn and grow and start businesses and write books and, take college courses radically early. It's amazing what's possible.
Yeah, well, the thing that my parents are very wary of the government school system, um, for religious reasons, and the Mormon religion has a history of not trusting the government, the U.S.
Rightly
government,
so.
right? Um, but just that sense, like I'm not going to entrust my son to be under the watch and care and mentoring of someone that fundamentally does not hold him in their heart, um, I think is a beautiful thing. And I think a lot of young people, when they're rejecting authority, a lot of times they're saying, "I don't trust you to tell me what to do," you know, and it's probably for good reason a lot of the times. And I think that that should be affirmed. That Yeah, go ahead.
Trust is the currency of education and really life. And so without trust, you can't really do much. But I'll just be clear, Michael. The reason that I distrust the educational system is not necessarily about it being government run, et cetera. It's really just an understanding of human nature. And that, a teacher that's got 30 kids in a classroom who is being pressured by their principal to do certain things, who's being pressured by their superintendent to do certain things, that teacher can't think about what my child actually needs on a moment by moment basis. They just can't do it. So regardless of the political dynamics around, values, and it's just straight human nature for me. I If I want a great educational learning experience for my child, there's got to be a child centered approach to learning rather than a school or institutional centered approach to teaching. And that's the distinction I make.
Thinking with your next two kids, how did you uh, go about that?
Yeah. So, after, you know, after they were around 12, 13 years old, we really gave them decision making authority. My daughter, my second child, she wanted to go to a public school, and as a ninth grader, went. She actually loved the experience. She finished the first year as a straight A student, as I think you mentioned in the intro. But she then said, Dad, I don't want to go back because it takes 7.5 hours of my day plus 2 hours at home doing homework at night. I can learn a lot faster than that. And the things I'm studying, I don't have any interest in learning those things. Can I do something different? And it's like, yeah, because you're making the call. Yeah, this is a really important point too, Michael. Um, the goal for every parent, I would argue, is freedom. Freedom for the child and freedom for the parent. And what I mean by that is when my daughter starts making decisions for herself, guess what? I don't have to make them for her. She becomes free to make her own decisions, and she becomes good at it because she's doing it in a transition as I start to help her launch, right? So by the time she was 16, 17 years old, she was able to make really smart decisions, not all the time, but she learns from each decision that she makes. That's the freedom that I want parents to realize, not what I often see is the 22-year-old who's sleeping on the couch of mom's house or dad's house who's unmotivated, who doesn't feel like they can do anything. That's not what freedom is. That's dependence. And unfortunately, our structure of education creates those kids more often than we'd like to admit. So that was my middle daughter. My youngest daughter, same deal. Hey, what do you want to do? What we have a whole system that I could show you at some later point around what's called a learning journey. We start with the areas that the child shows interests, and then we ask the child, well, how would you learn more about this? And usually it starts with interacting with a human being. And so my daughter, who showed interest in acting, she contacted the director of a local play or a playhouse, um, interviewed her a few months later, got called for a small bit, did a really good job, got called back. She's about to do her next professional acting gig the whole month of September and October. Um, and what she learns is how to deal with adults, how to manage herself and her time, how to deal with stressful situations. I mean, in acting, how to stand in front of couple hundred people. I mean, those are skills that are lifelong. So I wouldn't trade that for, an A in math.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I remember being, 13, 14 and wanting to work, wanting to get a job, wanting to make my own money, but the local laws against child labor wouldn't allow that, and, yeah, there's so much idiocy we have to deal
Yeah.
with.
But now, Michael, that stuff you can hack that, right? My
Yeah,
daughter was working at 15 as a consultant, right? You can hack anything you want at this point. And I know 10-year-olds who are earning
and I
money
did.
selling.
I did.
Yeah. Okay.
I was working since a young age. I got jobs with my grandfathers. I did all sorts of things, but, um, yeah, that's a great, I mean, pathway to learning. And it hasn't been so long ago that, in fact, still in a lot of places in the world, children work, and I understand the sentiment. Yeah, you don't want them to be slaves, right? I get that. But children are curious and they want to test themselves and they want to grow and they want to do what dad does or mom does, and to not allow them to just follow their heart and their passion and learning and growing is yeah, it's just idiotic.
Well, and I will just let me tweak if I could, Michael, just a little bit, because passion is actually I want to be careful about people hearing that word and saying, okay, my child is passionate about basketball, so I should let him play basketball all day long. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the child is interested in basketball. So now let's use basketball as a vehicle to educate him about marketing, about law, about finance, about science, about everything that that child is going to need to be successful, whether they're a professional athlete or not. So it's not necessarily that we allow them to pursue their passion. We use that passion as leverage for learning that's going to matter longer term. And again, we as adults have to play a role in recognizing what the child is likely to need to be successful as in the future. And another place where a lot of parents don't realize just how radically this world is changing and how quickly and how little the importance of school is now.
Yeah, and school seems to, not only is it not preparing us for the marketplace of today, but in a lot of ways it stifles us from developing our creativity, which is going to be, which is, if you want to have a job in the future that AI or some technology can't do, you- you're going to have to develop your creativity, and that's kind of antithetical to the public school system right now.
Absolutely. It's so clear and it's so scary how little kids are given the freedom to create or produce, right? Or sell, or negotiate, like all these skills that are lifelong and they don't get a chance to do them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of exaggerated here in East Africa. Um, Kids look to, and the parents look to school system as the way out. Um, and they have the kind of the old British school system here. It's very authoritarian, um, and they they don't really stand a chance, even if they get into university. Like the poor kids in Kenya, I don't know, it's the top 10 or 20% that'll get a university education if they score high enough in their high school. But the rates of even those who get a decent job out of university is very low. And when I said I was invited to come to Kenya in 2006, um, a woman was taking some high school American high school kids here on a kind of cross cultural journey. She needed someone to teach a curriculum, and I was so passionate about like a visionary and entrepreneur kind of curriculum. And I came here, and I've done that a number of times over the years here. But here, the thinking is simply like the only chance is university, and even that is not going to probably get you out of the situation your parents are in. Um, but because that's the only hope, so many of the kids that know I'm not going to be in the top 10 or 20%, they're just there. They're just staring at the textbook and, you know, and it's, I was in Uganda in 2000. I spent about 5 months there in 2014 at a school to help them set up a computer and internet system at their school, and they had an entrepreneur class there, and I was excited because I'm passionate about entrepreneurship. And I went into the classroom, and all the kids were like just bored. I was like, "What's going on?" And I looked at the textbook, and they were just being that what they were being taught about entrepreneurship was just expected to memorize a bunch of facts around about business. And I was like, "Oh."
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Because
That's the model.
entrepreneurship is a way out for it could be for almost all of them.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yep. But that's the so we've the United States has exported that model of education, like that the way to learn is to sit in a classroom with a textbook or some person in front of you that's deploying information into you. But again, Michael, you know this, the world and information is now open and we can find it's permissionless. We can learn anything we want if we have a desire to learn. The problem now though is we lack young men and women who have a desire to learn. So here is the other kind of secret sauce, Michael, that I would encourage you if you get her out in Kenya and you're able to. I've actually had a couple parents I've worked with in Kenya. It's just, culturally it's tricky here, but it's called a dream map or a mission map, and that is kind of what we were talking about a moment ago, where you ask the child if what are one or two things that you would do, son or daughter, if you knew you could not fail. What would it be? And though that answer causes the child to open up and to not say things that are safe, but to actually go, I want to do X, Y, or Z, or I want to be a dancer, I want to, go to the moon, whatever. And then you build a learning journey based on that desire. Because if the child says, one thing I'd want to do if I knew I couldn't fail is to go to the moon, now you have a window of learning that you can now support the child through, and the child will begin to lead themselves on that journey. So,
Astronaut
and again,
training
within
begins now.
look, and the internet, right? If you have access to the internet, the next move would be go and Google or search for NASA astronauts, and you send 10 notes as a 10-year-old to NASA astronauts saying, I'd like to interview you because I'd like to learn about what it's like to be an astronaut. And I promise you, you send 10 of those notes, you're going to get one or two that are going to say, happy to interview you. That is how the confidence that comes that from saying, okay, here's something I want to do, and I'm going to now actually begin the process of doing it. That is an entrepreneur. That is a learner. That is what a 21st century young person needs to have. But again, it's not taught in school. It has to be taught outside of it. And there's where the parent can play that role.
I love it. I love it. So,
It's beautiful, dude. That's actually how my girls in particular were able to do all these things. They started to follow their interests. Yep.
what resources have you relied upon? Where have you kind of expanded your vision of what's possible in this realm?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple individuals that were really helpful. A guy named Michael Strong, who I think you know,
Yep, yep.
who's one of the best thinkers I've met in the world of education. So, for folks that are listening, if you Google Michael Strong, he's got this program called the Socratic Experience, where it is a questioning of children. It's just asking them questions and letting the child learn how to discover. It's a beautiful model, but he's a guy who has helped me. I read a lot of his stuff on LinkedIn. He's prolific in his writing. But LinkedIn actually is a place where I have done most of my learning around where is education going, what are the opportunities, who's thinking differently in this space, and who are people that I can learn from because I'm helping other parents. I want to learn from people who are thought leaders. And so I would encourage parents to go to LinkedIn. You can follow me. I tend to write a lot there. Follow Michael Strong and others.
Mm. What would you say to the so I'm about to have my first child in about a month and a half.
Oh, yes.
Getting a late start,
Congrats.
but yeah,
That's all right.
yeah. And I often said, like, if I have one, I'm gonna have a dozen. So,
We better get
so
started, brother.
yeah, yeah. So I come from a large family, and I love it. But um, yeah, what's your advice starting young, like as far as the path to the introduction to education?
Yeah. So there's a model that I'll try to draw for you a little bit. When the child is first born, you are 100% in control, in authority over that child, right? I mean, you decide when they go to bed, decide when their diaper's going to be changed, when they're going to eat, what they're going to eat. You decide everything, right? The child decides virtually nothing. They're all based on just what they're feeling. Now, so if you think about that, 13 years from now, you want the child to become more of a decision maker in their life than you. So from zero, where the child is now, and you're 100%, you want the child to be 51% or so around age 13, maybe a little earlier if possible. And so for you, I would argue you should be constantly thinking, what is this child capable of doing right now that I'm not giving them the ability to do? So, an infant, that's an easy answer. It's not much. But when they start to become a toddler, they're actually capable of learning how to sit and to control themselves, but they have to be trained on how to do that. So, just like a head coach, I know that if my child at age 13 is going to be a good decision maker, they need to be self controlled. So, I'm going to begin teaching self control. And there's a very simple way to do that. It's called SIT time, sit time. And all it is progressive um, uh, time that you're giving your child to sit on a mat or a towel, some space that's defined with one book or one toy. And you begin around age maybe 12 or 15 months and start with like 5 seconds of sit time. And you slowly increase that to the point where at age 18 months or 2 years old, the child can actually, without objection, sit for 30 minutes reading one book. It happens with consistency. I've seen it happen in dozens of families. People taught me how to do it. I didn't believe it, but I did it, and my children then became ridiculously self-controlled. So they'd sit at a restaurant, and we'd have sit time, and they would be perfectly fine. They wouldn't have a video or any sort of. They would just have a book or crayon, one crayon. These are the types of strategies that I would encourage you to be thinking about. You want that boy or girl to be self-governing ridiculously early. And that means there's some things you're going to have to train, and you're going to have to recognize when my child is capable of doing something, how am I going to help them learn how to do it so that I can then be free? I can step away and let them lead their own life, and I can walk alongside them as needed.
I love it. I've been traveling the world the last 14 years, and my vision is to keep going with children in tow. We'll see how that goes. But as of right now, that's that's the plan. I've learned so much just traveling the world and showing up in new lands and cultures. Yeah. So, in our introduction here, you're talking about you said if you're raising a black boy in America, then you should treat the traditional school like a rabid dog. Don't make eye contact. Don't feed it. Just back away slowly. I mean, that's a pretty harsh statement. So you're basically telling, um, African American parents to take their kids out of school.
I'm telling them exactly that. Yep. And again, it sounds like a harsh statement, but let me just tell you, um, right down the street, and in fact, my district, 1 in 10 black boys is reading on grade level in by third grade. If that is, you hear that? 9 out of 10 are not reading on grade level. So if I am harsh by saying parents, hey, you need to do something different, then then who's holding the school accountable? Who's saying that that's a number that's just absolutely unacceptable? Nobody. So yes, it depends on the circumstance, but my point here is parents be really, 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 really suspicious of that system and educational structure we call a school. Whether you're black or white or whatever, be suspicious because it is built for a time and a world that no longer exists. And everybody knows it, but we all keep doing it because we don't realize how many amazing new models that are out there that lead to amazing outcomes for our kids. And so we just stick with the old model that we know, but we also know that model is broken. So yes, I stand by that statement, and will challenge anybody to debate me on it.
I wonder if you ever saw John Taylor Gatto's The Ultimate History Lesson.
Yeah, he's one of the other guys that I've read about. Yeah, yeah, I forgot, should have mentioned his name. Yeah, um, for again, these are the places where people like me, I get geeky, I get nerdy on these things. I go deep, and I start realizing just how horrific the preparation that schools actually make for young people, particularly boys, particularly for black boys. And as I learn that, I can't help but have a very firm and very harsh critique of that model, saying nothing about the hard work that people are trying to do to fix it, but it's not working, hasn't been working for a long time. And the world is changing so fast, we cannot afford another generation of kids to come through thinking that getting a college degree is the way I'm going to be successful. That those days are over.
Amen. Amen. Wow, this is yeah, this is beautiful. So what's um if you could speak directly, to those parents, who are waking up to this and give them maybe very specific advice or a next step. What's the next step or two?
Well, there's two. I'll give you two, maybe three. The first one is you got to find your assistant coaches. You got to this is raising a young person, particularly a young boy, is not a solo sport. It is a team sport. You've got to contact your close friends or relatives and say, "Listen, I'd like us to enter into an ongoing conversation about how do I raise this boy so he's prepared." Right? That's the first step because again, I've seen too many parents that try to do it alone, they flame out. The second step is um,
But Matt, today women don't need a man.
well, look, I don't know what a woman needs, right? All I can say though
Yeah.
is what a child needs is a assistant. They need an ecosystem around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, another place where if folks want to debate me, actually, I don't even want to bother debating. If you don't believe that your child needs an ecosystem around them, then listen to somebody else. I'm not the person to talk to. Um, So first is creating that ecosystem. The second one is beginning a conversation. And and that conversation has to be about strategy. So what I would, I mean, again, I offer a free service where you can reach out and we can begin that conversation. But if you're not willing to put the work in, I'm not going to bother wasting my time. So finding your assistant coaches or beginning that process of reaching out and then beginning the process of getting prepared, learning how to be strategic around this again, as I hope folks have heard, the opportunities for learning are just so vast. They're so vast, and they're so much better than your child sitting in a classroom, and they're so much more fun for your child, and they can start making money at age 10. I mean, there's all sorts of upsides here. The downside is that parents have to now go, wait a second, okay, I'm going to have to step in. I'm going to have to play a leadership role in a way that I delegated or abdicated before. And that's the choice that parents need to make. This is the third point. you will need to choose. You will need to choose who's going to be the head coach of your child. It can be the church, the pastor's church. It can be the school. It could be it could be the government. It could be the police officer down the street. Someone's going to be a head coach of your child eventually. The question is, are you going to lead it so that they can become their own head coach? So those are three. Get your assistant coaches lined up. Start with me for a conversation or someone you trust who you can get some strategy around how to change your child's educational future, and then make the choice whether or not you are going to lead your child or you're going to give it to somebody else.
That's beautiful. Do you have any experience with any of these, different wilderness programs? They kind of take troubled teens out into just nature, and over a period of weeks or months, they kind of find themselves and they maybe recalibrate their bearings. And
Yeah, I'm familiar with several of them, my only critique about them is twofold. One is you're usually really expensive, so it's only for folks that have the ability to pay, and then secondly, they're usually not long enough, right? The amount of time for a child to really disconnect from that culture that has trained them to think of themselves as a failure, and to see that the highest aim for a young man is to entertain themselves with video games or football. That takes time to unwind. I love your idea, Michael. I think if you're going to spend that kind of money, parent, I would argue that you should take your child to a completely different country where they do not speak the language and just throw them into the school there, because the child's going to learn that there's a different culture, and that culture can be very happy in different ways. They're going to meet new friends, they're going to learn, and then do it again after 3 or 4 years, move to another country. And at that point, they will be safe. They will realize that they can learn the new language, they can meet new friends, they can do all right. That is the most valuable. And I'm envious that you've had that chance to travel, Michael. Most folks don't, but it's possible now in a way that has never been in the history of humanity.
yes, so much is possible. Matt, this has been so valuable. Yeah, so exciting. Um, Also, yeah, especially the I feel it's a very exciting calling for fathers to be head coaches of their sons and to be strategic and get the assistant coaches together. And yeah, I love it, man. I love it. That's great. So how can people find you? How can people listening to this reach out to you? And
Yeah, best way to do that is at my website. It's a real simple website because it just gets you connected with me in a conversation. And it's mattcbarnes.com. MATTC is the letter C, Barnes, BARNES.com. The first step would be kind of an intake form where you give me how you see education. I will send a video of me saying, okay, based on what you're saying, here are the places that you need to be really careful about. If you want to have a further conversation, there'll be a scheduled opportunity to schedule a call for me. Again, all of my services are free. I get some Patreon support. I have resources on my own to support this, and this is my mission. This is why I'm on the earth, to help parents avoid some of the pain that I had to go through, and to also make sure that my daughters have good men to marry, and my son has good men to work to heal this broken world together.
mm, where were you when I was in high school?
Oh, dude, I tell you, I wish I wish I'd had some of the opportunities that are available to kids nowadays, and would have been really transformational to my brother, myself, both of my brothers, so many friends. I mean, it's amazing. But only thing we can do now is move forward and try to help as many young people get access to this as possible. And again, my argument is it starts with the parent.
Yes, the future is ours to create, and yeah, the parent has the ability to make that decision. Take that responsibility. Matt Barnes, thank you so much for your time and for your what you're giving to parents and to young men.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.